After a chance encounter with an old friend, Pilo, Norstrand learned of those who could potentially help him speak to Naya, who he has since feared dead, a strange collective of people known as Windows. Watching them at a distance for days, he decided to follow on into the unknown regions of the Dark Sentencer. This eventually led him to a cave, where a strange ritual was being performed. This was his chance, his opportunity to speak to the man known as Mr. Wish, the only individual he had any hope of reconnecting with his lost love. After a brief interaction with Mr. Wish, he learned Naya wasn't willing to speak to him. She might not be gone. However, Norstrand was shown something. Visions of a child, not from this time. Brief glimpses into a life that he had helped to create. He has, or perhaps one day will have, a son. With this revelation, Norstrand is rendered unconscious by a blow to the head. He awoke deep into the Dark Sentencer in a hellish new environment. This is the area where people serve the Queen of the Dark. In the holding area of this sector, Norstrand became acquainted with a young man named Sam. Learning small details of each other's lives till this point allowed Norstrand to feel something towards this young man. After this scant encounter, sentencing began. The figure that lay before them offered two paths, servitude or food. When Norstrand stepped forward, he had a sense of familiarity with the tendrilled creature in front of him. Under a shimmering crystalline crown, he knew it was her. That's Naya. And she wasn't dead. And she was here, in the Dark Sentencer, with him. Naya had meant it each time she told the prisoners that their past were irrelevant to her. She was aware that Norstrand showing up unexpectedly was the ultimate test to see whether she was unequivocally true, and as she dressed in her room for a very important meeting, her feelings danced between anger and excitement, like a pair of exhausted feet. Of course she couldn't stop the flitter in her chest upon seeing him again, and she hated the chemicals in her body for betraying her brain in that moment. A big part of her considered murdering him while he slept for leaving her in a bank vault to die. She carefully unwired the intricate crown from her head, placing it gently in a safe controlled by her specific DNA reading. Even though her guards had been handpicked by her from potential subservers after exhibiting loyalty and dedication, Naya trusted no one these days, with fantastic reason. It had never been easy for her to open up. Even as a child, growing up on Galadline, one of the most picturesque and beautiful suburbs on Rutema. Maybe it was the pragmatic location, paired with her own atypical existence, that pushed Naya back into herself all throughout her formative years. It began with the loss of her mother at birth. Then, as Naya progressed from rolling to crawling to walking, her father, Maury, had noticed her struggling with depth perception, chronically bumping into chairs and objects in her field of vision, continuing long after she should have been walking with more ease. As time went by, he noticed a gleam to one of her eyes, as if a light was turned on inside of her head. Naya was diagnosed with a rare form of one-sided blindness due to blood vessels that had bloomed behind her retina. The condition hadn't hindered her, at least not physically, yet. Naya was further aware that she was different, navigating the existential map of growing up, in a traditional town of estates where families were made up of 4 or 5. The one-bedroom cottage she shared with her dad felt warm and loving, but still. The stillness had funneled into her ears some afternoons, inspiring Naya to stir up commotion just to hear the sound of his voice. Her father did his best, while crushed between the heaviness of bereavement from losing a partner and the burden of single-handedly raising a child who looked to him as if he created the universe. When Naya was barely 19, she had stood at her dying father's bedside, whilst he begged for her forgiveness for not moving on, never giving her a chance at a maternal figure to guide her, or a sibling to share the deep sadness that she would now have to carry alone. She lugged the suitcase of grief along the way every day since his passing, but never once felt like it was supposed to be any other way. Naya stepped into a pair of hard-shell boots, zipping them up at the sides. She twisted her hair back, slicking it off her face. She didn't need anything else getting in her way. Not today. She had already lost so much in her life. 176 days. That's how long she was kept on life support, the hospital and the HOSS in continuous and heated debate over whether it was an ethical choice. Law enforcement wanted someone to pay for the string of high-profile robberies that had been taking place across their city by a trio of masked offenders known to the media as the Unheavenly creatures. They needed a name, and her story had a captivating headline to match. Member of the Unheavenly creatures in custody. Woman known as Sister Spider charged in string of high-profile heists. Eventually she was moved to a private HOSS facility where doctors and unnamed people with deep pockets waited around the clock in hopes that she would wake. The foreign sounds from the ventilator that kept her alive had become some sort of musical score to her glacial recovery, to her lucid, comatose dreams. When she finally did wake, Naya started spinning her own web of plans immediately. She was experienced enough to know that the only thing more valuable to the HOSS than a dumb criminal, someone to throw away at the first sign of trouble, was a gifted one. She could paint herself whatever shade they were looking for, if she could determine what that was. Authorities had found Nostran's mask at the scene, watched footage of the three entering the bank, and now they wanted more information on her team. As far as she was concerned, she didn't have a team anymore. Naya knew that she had something HOSS needed. With Colossus and Creature still roaming free, their vast number of financial institutions en route Tamer continued to be at risk. Nothing could be considered safe until they were found. She held on to that card, waiting for the perfect time to lay it on the table. One day she awoke to a visitor beside her bed. He wore a uniform she was unfamiliar with, and he described himself only as someone with common interests. Naya was given a choice: be prosecuted at a maximum sentence and forced to work in one of the HOSS's detention centers, or if she was willing to give information on the whereabouts of the two masked men, HOSS would be inclined to offer her a position within the organization, supervising the sublevels of the Dark Sentencer. Her sole responsibility would be to ensure that the harvest of the raw core energy was completed on a continuous schedule until the planet eventually turned cold and fell into nothingness. A closer reality than any of the inmates could know. There she would be granted her freedom, a new name, and a chance to begin again. Naya was no fool. She gave up the familiar locations that she and Nostrand had taken as their own, feeling hardly a twinge of guilt for offering him up to a sacrifice after what he'd done to her. After what he allowed Otto to do. HOSS set their sights on finding Nostrand and Otto, while Naya Warren quietly and fictitiously died in a brief paragraph in the American Times. Only the mysterious visitor hadn't told her the other darkest part. The core was toxic. It burned through skin and muscle, seeding its blazing poison into anyone or anything in close proximity. The powerful glass suit had been designed and constructed for her to keep her protected from the radiation of the core. She was also able to arrange for insulating layers to shield her guards, but the modest number of workers assigned to zero level had decayed before her. Naya was given no choice but to send out recruiters to capture new prisoners. She assigned some of her subservers to build apparatuses to hold each other's bodies together so that they could work. It was hard for her to watch. Men and women in full collapse, their minds wet with blood day after day. Blindness, illness, sadness, compounded by limited resources. There was never enough food. HOSS had cut back their supply of palladium in recent weeks. The subservers couldn't go on this way without more support from upstairs. Naya tried to separate herself emotionally from the role that she played as the Glass Widow, but she developed a respect for those who worked beneath her. Not quite a fondness, but certainly the belief that they deserved some dignity. So she was going to do something about it. The warden had sent a transport ship to pick her up at the pavilion by way of an armoured limousine to carry her through the upper levels of this planet. The only time Naya left the zero level was to meet with the warden at his station off-world. It was a bright spot in her hazy, seamless days to see action on the drive up to the pavilion. The Dark Sentencer was a synthetic version of real life, out of sync and tattered, but it was better than holding court over a realm of the breathing dead. She watched out the window of her vehicle as a group of inmates gambled for painkillers on the side of the street, the winner shouting out in victory, knowing that the spoils could be traded for just about anything. In the low, murky light, she caught a glimpse of two people kissing hard against a building. She turned her view back to inside of the car. The act of living was too much for her to handle, as she'd gone so long without settling for simply existing. The pavilion was quieter than usual as Naya boarded the ship, her 4 guards alongside her. At a certain point every few days, production and processing had overlapping changeovers, resulting in a slowdown. Only one exporter ship left the planet with a 2-hour block instead of the typical 5 departures. The quiet period rotated on a cycle and was barely noticeable, especially to those who didn't know the export schedule. But Naya noticed. She wondered if there was a smarter way to handle the changeovers. Interesting, she had thought. Maybe I'll bring it up to the warden. Staying in his good graces was a good idea. The warden had always seemed to hold kind of a soft spot for Naya, despite his reputation as the coldest man in the galaxy. Most likely because she'd proven to be as hard of a worker as he was, diligent, reliable, and respected. As the ship launched from the pavilion's bay, Naya closed her eye and for a few moments allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to fly away from this planet for the last time. The rusty glow radiated behind her, a ruddy orange halo. Stars crashed into her eyelids. Galaxies tattooed themselves across her stomach. Alternate realities settled into her heart. All of them falling away as the warden's station, the watchtower, appeared ahead of the ship, connected dots in unlimited space. It was a massive structure, a mixture of universally sourced materials and impenetrable glass, perched on a triangular silhouette. Incoming transmission. A holographic image of the security custodian on the station lit up within the ship, verifying Naya's identity and authenticating the guards who accompanied her. She offered up no pleasantries, saving whatever bullshit greeting that she could muster for the warden. Smiles were in limited supply these days, and she snatched them up like photographs from a burning house. Access granted. Her boots silently rebounded across the plank of the watchtower. The Dark Sentencer, always under close watch, was visible through the enormous plates of glass surrounding them. It was disconcerting, as if you were walking in street clothes through the night sky. The warden met her there, nodding his head professionally to Naya, his lack of facial features diminishing her ability to read his mood. Fortunately, his makers had balanced him carefully designed poker face with exaggerated body language, so there was still some humanity left to him, and today his gestures were big and marked. Naya felt his nerves in every movement. Good day, Mr. Glass. Fuck. Bollocks. Good day, Miss Glass, he said. You look well. His voice was a near monotone, not entirely robotic, but hardly something produced by a living being. I've told you, you're free to call me Naya, sir, she replied, spending one of those saved-up smiles. Haven't I mentioned I prefer not to, considering it's no longer your name? Despite his choice of wording, it was a statement and not a question. Yes, I'm sorry. Miss Glass is fine. No apology needed. Let's talk in my office, shall we? Naya ordered her guards to stay behind in the lobby, as they always did during these meetings. No extra ears needed to access these private conversations. The warden led her to his personal office, a sprawling glass room behind double doors. Holographic technology projected real-time happenings on every level of the prison. Some images, the less excited ones, were shrunken to small screen sizes, while others had been zoomed in on. Naya saw the warden had quite a few images pulled up large-scale, seedy areas in level 7 and 5 that were notorious for underhanded dealings. A bar she'd never seen before, and the processing plant on level 4. In the corner, a security device scanned the room back and forth for any changes in composition. Naya was not a direct threat, so her presence was marked as only low priority. On his desk sat a stack of ordnance devices, issued to new HOSS administration assigned to the Dark Sentencer. The devices were used for communication between guards, geo-tracking of inmates, and, most importantly, to control the gutters within each designated district. Naya noticed that the stack of devices looked used, as if they'd been returned or possibly in need of repair. The warden sat down on one of the two high-back chairs. They had no legs, hovering above the ground, instead, adjusting up or down on command. Naya resisted the urge to rock nervously in hers, sitting up straight instead. "So, do tell," he said. "How is life below?" Was he toying with her? She couldn't quite be sure. "Bleak, sir," she said. "That's the reason that I asked for this meeting earlier than usual. As you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity that the 5 houses have provided for me, but our food supply has been cut nearly in half. I'd like to know why." The warden tapped his rod-like fingers on the desk. They made a hollow sound, a drum roll. "It only seemed fair, given that your production output has decreased by that amount." "Sir, as my server's near the end of the core energy, it's harder to mine. It takes longer to extract, it's far hotter. But that doesn't mean that they're not working as much as before. The product is the hindrance here, not my team." "I see. And?" "And," she said, "I need more supplies if you expect production to continue at any pace. More food, more protective gear, masks, temperature regulation. Half of my workers have lost their sight. Others keep dropping dead from malnourishment. I've tried to..." She paused, looking at the ground momentarily in shame. "Supplement my own, but it's still not enough." "Meaning?" "Sacrifice. Some have had to be sacrificed for the greater good of the workforce and the harvest." "My, you are resourceful, Miss Glass." "I do what must be done," she said. "But with more support from HOSS, I really believe that we could speed up production. I'm not asking for much, sir. 20% more pabulum, and a shipment of protective gear would suffice." "We've already given you the quintillion speakers as a gesture of goodwill, to help speed along the process with the core. Do you have any idea how valuable they are in of themselves? I understand in their ability to come in direct contact with the core has been integral in siphoning energy at a faster rate, but I think you're missing my point," he said, then motioned to a graphic in perpetual motion on the wall. It was a sequence of charts and numbers. None of them made any sense to Naya, but she studied them, looking for a point the warden mentioned. "The planet is nearing its end more rapidly than we initially anticipated. Analysis is showing clear indicators. Earthquakes on the alternate side, unusual cooling of the outer level." An alarm blared in the room, diverting the warden's attention from his train of thought. He slammed his hands on the desks angrily, another animated gesture. "Excuse me one moment," he said, spinning the chair away from her. Naya watched in shock as he illuminated a small screen in front of him. She heard him say the word override. Then he began moving a series of code across it, his hands moving so quickly they left a trail of blur behind them. SA#9432DL+W***81. She watched the surveillance system scan left and right as it did periodically, waiting for it to move to the opposing side of the room. When it moved out of her vision, she silently slipped one of the discarded ordnance devices into her jumpsuit when the warden's back was turned. He hit a red button labeled Execution, closed the holoscreen. Then he spun back, slowly to face Naya again, closing his metallic throat. She absently scratched her wrist from behind her long-sleeved jumpsuit with her long index nail, waiting for him to put out whatever fire he was attempting to extinguish. "My apologies." Naya hesitated. "So, what do your predictions say about the time that we have left?" "Well, of course there's no way to know for sure, but a month, maybe weeks." Shock, pause, panic. The warden continued, paying no mind to her concerns, his focus on production, as was his way. Obviously, this should have no bearing on your ruling of the sublevels. The five houses would not be pleased if mining were to come to a halt. In fact, I would venture to say that they expect you to make the most of the time that this planet has left and extract as much of the core energy as possible. I'm sorry, yeah, she stumbled. Of course. So you see how it would be hard for me to justify your requests when the planet is so close to immediate collapse. I have another suggestion. Why don't we replenish your workforce? I will provide you with a new labor pool from the upper levels if you need. There's a rhythm to working in the mines at such intense depth. It would set us back exponentially to replace the crew at this point and cost you far more in the long run waiting for the harvest, she said. If they were given the right tools to survive, I know that they could do better. That would be the strongest option. Actually, as this planet nears its end, I think it would be in your best interest to utilize them in other detention zones, to mine energy on alternative planets. They are skilled, hard workers. As you mentioned mere moments ago, your labourers are crumbling. What good would that do if we invest time and transport in moving a dying troop of prisoners off-world? You've known that they're disposable and made your choice with that knowledge. Please, sir, consider it. That was some time ago. Now I believe they deserve the chance to be spared, as I have. Yes, he said flatly. As you have. She sat back in her chair. I feel I've not disappointed you in my rule of 0 level, sir. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited at the prospect of going home when my service is done, but you understand, this time-light, it comes as a shock. I will relay your request for food and supplies to the 5 houses today. In the meantime, continue on as you have been. As for my pardon, sir, I was hoping that we could hash out the details, since I'm here for now. The warden stood up. That will have to wait for another day. I'm afraid I have other business to attend with some last-minute guard adjustments, he said. But soon. Naya stood, doling out another light grin. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was working directly against what she'd worked for. But she couldn't let on. Not here, and certainly not now. She shook the warden's hand and saw herself out, picking up her guards outside of the closed doors. They walked down the cold hallway like a pride of lions, back toward the transport that had brought them. As the ship flew back towards the dark sentencer, Naya felt the fractured light and pointed shadows covering her again. The endless, sweltering cycle of night they were returning to. She peered back towards the watchtower, a place that had been a sign of hope for her, a structure embodying redemption. Now she looked out of the window of her transport, beyond the triad that held the station in place. She felt nothing but betrayal. And when Naya saw the warden there on the viewing platform, his body poised to watch the departing ship as it moved away from him, she could tell by his body language that she'd only ever been given one choice all along. The warden returned to his office, feeling quite overloaded with the growing list of complications that had unfolded around the untimely expiration of the Dark Sentencer. Of course, he wouldn't be asking for anything extra from the HOSS for the 0 level. Naya and her crew were never really meant to make it out of this alive. It may as well have been the centre of an inferno. The open pit in the centre of 0 level was torrid, throwing angry heat in waves at the subservers as they worked away with axes and turn drills, ripping away at the heart of the planet. The conditions made every part of being alive miserable. Even turning one head was an exhaustive feat. Nordstrom stood between a group of labourers, their hands on a thick, heat-proof glass chain snaked into the centre of the pit. Nearly every server around him had bolts and stabilizers implanted at various points of their bodies. The dangerously thin man in front of him didn't have much of a spine. Instead, his back was held up via a Byzantine labyrinth of thin metal rods, seemingly implanted in the vertebrae he had left. As he leaned forward, the metal grated together like forked tines on cement. The sweat from Nostrom's forehead had calcified, creating a terrain of salt in the deep furrow of his brow. His lashes looked as if they were covered in snowflakes, but the reflection in his eyes was one of pure heat. On the count, the group heaved back with all of their might, pulling on the chain and revealing a giant container glowing white-hot from the centre of the pit. They worked in 10-hour shifts with 4 hours of rest between, repeated over and over and over again until Nostrum swore he could feel his shoulder muscles splitting apart. After a short 15-minute break, he was taxed with the Ultra Extractor, a device created to bore deep into the rock, through the core, to get to hard-to-dig places. The machine was unwieldy and gave off a vibration that rattled one's organs from within their cavities, but he worked diligently, in hopes of earning the opportunity to speak with Naya. He hadn't been able to get this close to her since he'd arrived. In fact, he'd not even seen her at all, really. Though he imagined that she didn't come to the mines often and they hadn't been there long. The series of cameras set up in the mine seemed like a better method of confirming work had never come to a halt. Nostrum trudged across the field, dragging a container full of broken rock into a discard area. As he skirted along the edge of the mine, he couldn't help but peer down into the radiant trench, the light phosphorescent from the depths of the planet. It burned through his vision, searing his sinuses with a single look. But before he turned away, Nostrum swore he saw a bronze face peering back at him, horns splaying from its temples and a mouth turned down in agony as it seemed to move directly from the burning core. For a split second, he imagined it was a quintillion speaker. Children across the universe had been whispering about them for as long as he could remember. Strange beings conceived of energy from the Great Crash. Elders swore that they existed from long ago, one of the universe's most powerful resources, trapped between the past and the future. They were the stuff of legend. Only no one could remember where this legend began. No, it can't be, he thought, even though he doubted his mind was even capable of making something so crazy in its current state. Nostrum rubbed his face, trying to regain his sight as the series of flashes and floaters disappeared from his view. He saw Sam across the workfield, slamming away trying to kickstart a stalled core-powered earth mover. The kid looked utterly defeated, his ribs popping through his thin skin. Nostrum estimated they'd been down there maybe 1 week, despite it feeling like a lifetime. Even in that short while, he'd noticed Sam losing weight, burns cropping up on his abdomen and face. He split his share with the kid, whether food or basic necessities. There was no way he was going to watch him waste away. A larger-than-life hologram of Naya, in full crown and glass jumpsuit, appeared at the edge of the mine. Attention! By the order of the Glass Widow, Subserver Shift 1 may now retreat to resting quarters for your scheduled 4-hour pause. Your time begins now. Thank you for your service. Nostrum waited for Sam and the pair rode into the suction-driven elevator through the mine in silence. Sam struggled to breathe, his lungs dusted with the noxious powder of the core. They walked down the long, chiseled corridor toward the sleeping area they shared with 30 others. The space was more of a shelter than a room, drilled out and lined with rows of cheaply constructed bunk beds, a small luxury that Naya had gone to bat for with a warden. The beds were divided by hanging curtains, offering the tiniest illusion of privacy. Nostrum sat on his bed and stretched his arms behind him, clasping his hands together in an attempt to appease his aching body. His long hair spread in matted chunks across the muscular carved into his back. Damn. No wonder these guys all have robot parts. Sign me up, he said, trying to lighten the heavy mood. Sam was already laying down on his bed, his body small and curled against the corner. He said nothing. I saw that they assigned you to the Earth Mover today. Sam relented. Yeah, a second day in a row. Machines aren't exactly my strength, unless they have computer guts. It's frustrating. Fortunately for me, pulling rare energy from a pit of doom until my shoulders bleed fits my career qualifications to a T, so... Sam gave a half-hearted smile, lacking the physical energy to give a whole. The room was nearly silent as the subservers practically blacked out from exhaustion. Nostrum unfolded himself onto the bed, the movements making him aware of muscles he didn't even know were part of his body. Nose? Yeah, Sam. How long do you think that we have? Nostrum swallowed. His tongue was stone. I'm not sure, kid. The honesty stung for a moment, but Nostrum could feel it healing, a bitter medicine. I'm not afraid, of dying. It'll be nice to see my mom again. I guess. I'm mad more than anything. I always thought that, when it was my time to go, I'd have accomplished some amazing things, Sam said, his voice cracking. So when I see her, I could tell her about it and she'd have something to be proud of. Nostrum felt tears welling up behind his eyes, but dehydration hadn't allotted any liquids for unexpected emotion. She's proud, Sam. When you see her, she'll tell you that herself. Get some sleep, okay? And with that, Sam fell hard asleep, dreaming away from the chewing melancholy of existence, while Nostrum lay there watching some imaginary constellations on the ceiling of the cave. For the first time in years, he felt somewhat at ease. Naya was alive. If she never spoke to him again, knowing that she was alright meant something. Sleep finally found him, but not for long. She watched him there for just a moment, examining his form like a memento from a former life. The way his right elbow bent at a perfect 90 degrees to cover his brow with his forearm. He seemed more vulnerable than she'd remembered. He looked the way that she felt. Naya felt satisfied having the upper hand. She extended her arm out to wake him, but Nostrand opened his eyes before she needed to, sensing her the way a radar might. She put her finger to her lips, needing him to remain silent. Shh. He considered that this might be a dream, until she grabbed him impatiently by the worn-out collar of his dirty shirt and pulled him up from the bed. He didn't resist. He knew better. Instead, stood and followed her just outside of the snore-filled cavern. She was dressed differently than in the throne room, clad in a white armoured jumpsuit that had some glassy sheen as if nearly thing everything else in zero level. She had a small backpack strapped to her. In the place of her crown, her hair was loose at her shoulders, straight and slick as a waterfall. They walked out into the low light of the tunnel where one of the guards waited, eyeing Nostrum with suspicion. Naya asked the guard to keep watch at the end of the corridor. Nostrand half squinted in the light, still emerging from such a heavy sleep. Naya was more than awake. She hadn't slept for some time. Thankfully, she was the kind of person who didn't need much. It kept her sharp. He waited for her to say something. I need you to listen without trying to speak because I don't have much time. There have been some developments here since my arrangement here. The short version is, she said, locking her eye on his. The planet's about to die, and with it, everyone here. I thought it'd take years before that happened. What did I ask? Listen, please. Nostrum nodded his head. He couldn't help but notice how much she'd grown. Even her choice of words was seasoned differently. Yet lacing up those years of earned sophistication flashed the wildness of an untamed soul. He wanted to wrap her up in his tired arms and save her from everything running through her head, but he knew that he had no business even thinking that. Not when he'd failed her so miserably once. The lifespan of the Dark Sentencer is much shorter than anyone had estimated, probably due to the rate that we've been mining the core. We've cut its throat, and somehow we're shocked that it's dying so fast, Naya said. She was irritated by all of their gullibility, including her own. She crossed her left leg over her right, stabilizing her body in the steep hallway. I have to assume that everything I was promised when I came here to take over the zero level was a lie, meaning they have no intention of sending me home. If we don't all starve first, my guess is we'll implode on a lifeless planet, she said. So my guards will accompany me tonight to the pavilion. I'm gonna take a ship. I understand that I don't know jack shit about you anymore, but I thought that you might find it in your heart to help the subservers here. I need you to free them, lead them out up to the higher levels as soon as possible, so you might have half a chance of getting out alive. Naya, of course you know me. I've never stopped searching for you since the... Stop. You're not healing a heart attack with a bandage. I told you we don't have time. Is it yes or no? Will you save them? Before Nostrum could say anything, a form came barreling down from the entry of the sleeping quarters. leading with a drawn ionic blaster. A muting device was attached to the top. Nostrum dodged the fire, angling his body to get underneath the weapon. He ripped the blaster from the man's hands, pulling his head back to the crook of his thick arm with a swift snap. The body went down hard, collapsing like cinder block onto the stone below. Naya's guard run down the tight corridor behind them, the fallen assassin an indicator that he would have been too late. Nostrand examined the blaster. Subtle circular HOSS branding etched into the handle. Naya breathed heavily as she realized it was way worse than she'd anticipated. Nostrand took her by the shoulders, gently. "Change your plans, that guy," he said, nodding to her guard. "He's going to stay here and help the others get out. I have an idea that might work if he's willing to relay a message to my friend Sam." "You should relay that message to him yourself." "I know I'm hard to stomach, Naya. I know that you hate me right now, and I can't prove why you shouldn't. But we have to move and get out of here. If we do this together, it's your best shot. You know I'm a fighter. Please let me come with you." Naya ran her tongue across the slick columns of her teeth, considering. "Fine," she said. "But you should know that I don't trust you." She picked up the blaster and fastened it to her waist, so I hold the gun. They were about to walk straight into the lion's den with meat strapped to their backs, but Nostrand hadn't been this excited in forever.